So the Rugby Championship for 2025 has concluded and the Springboks go back to back to win the Rugby Championship for this year. And throughout this competition, there have been some incredible performances. So in this video, I'm doing my team of the tournament, 15 of the best players, and then also offer the bench who was the best back and also who was the best forward for their respective sides. But jumping straight into it, the front row, there should be no surprises whatsoever here. Number 1, Oxenshare. Number 2, Malcolm Marx. Number 3, Thomas du Toit. Now, that number 3 jersey you could possibly say was a little bit closer to being debated, whether or not it was going to be Thomas du Toit or Wilco Louw, who did get that honour. But in terms of that number 1 jersey, Oxenshare has been absolutely incredible throughout this Rugby Championship. He's played 289 minutes and has only conceded 1 penalty. So that just shows you the class of the South African scrum, as well as Oxenshare in general. Throughout last year's Rugby Championship, he was also the man who received that Lucy Prop Player of the Tournament. And this year, it is absolutely no different for the Big Ox, as the number 1, Malcolm Marx, managing to score himself 2 tries in the last match up against Argentina, took his tally up to 4 for the competition, which actually made him tied for first in overall try scorers alongside Joseph Suaalii. Some would argue that Malcolm Marx should have had man of the match in that Twickenham performance rather than Cobus Reinach, but overall, the turnover ability of this man, the line-out accuracy, as well as just knowing how to score tries, puts Malcolm Marx once again in the team of the tournament for this year. Moving on to the locking duo. Now, I will say this is actually a very tricky 2 players to select because there have been some standout locks for pretty much every side throughout this Rugby Championship comp. Number 4, I have gone with Eben Etzebeth. Now, the veteran of the South African side, the most capped Springbok of all time. He had a decent Rugby Championship, but the thing is, it probably wasn't even his best. And that just tells you how strong of a player Eben Etzebeth is. He was solid in the lineouts for the South Africans, scored himself a try, and then also just enforced that physicality, just like Etzebeth always will. Honourable mentions, I've got quite a few throughout this video, but Nick Frost for the Australians, winning 20 lineouts and also having the most turnovers won out of any player of the Rugby Championship, definitely needs a big mention there. But I do think when you look at impact and what these 2 men were able to do for their sides, you'd say Eben Etzebeth, when he was playing well, was very impactful for the Springbok side. Number 5, this is actually where I've selected Fabian Holland. Now, I know what you're thinking straight away. Where is Ruan Nokia? And it was a very tough decision to decide out of Holland or Nokia in terms of who would I put in this team of the tournament. Fabian Holland winning the most lineouts out of any player throughout this Rugby Championship with 34. He also had a few steals along the way and was in the top 10 for tackles made throughout this Rugby Championship. Quite a few of those were dominant tackles, as he did show a lot of fearless tackling throughout the matches, even up against the top opposition. Up against the Springboks, we saw him making his way off of the bench. In the last lineup for New Zealand, he wasn't even across the 23. It was due to the injury of Tupovai that he got himself the chance, and again was the standout lock. So I do think that individual impact alone, Fabian Holland, with the fact that this is his debut Rugby Championship too, for me gets that number 5 jersey ahead of Ruan Nokia, who honestly also could go into this 5 jersey. When you look through what he was able to do in this season, 335 minutes played for Nokia, about 30 extra over Fabian Holland. He won 11 lineouts, so a lot less of a target when it came to that Springbok lineout. It was more so spread across their whole team, whereas Holland was the stock standard, exactly where New Zealand tried to go with Cody Taylor, and more times than not, they were able find their man. But moving on to the loose forward trio, and I talked about honourable mentions. There is a very long list in this loose forward trio. For blindside flanker, I have selected Pieter-Steph du Toit. Now, of course, he is normally wearing the 7 on his back, but the South Africans do have it slightly reversed, which does mean that Pieter-Steph is actually playing as a blindside flanker, so I can get away with selecting him as the number 6. He had 50 carries throughout this Rugby Championship, 4 clean breaks, 7 offloads, so love to keep that ball alive. We actually saw more offloads this year from South Africa than last, and I feel like that's a bit of that Tony ball coming in for this side. But overall, Pieter-Steph du Toit having another competition where it is very hard to argue that he is not going to be a nominee for Rugby Player of the Year. An honourable mention in that number 6 jersey. We saw some great work from Tom Hooper of the Australians. The one thing that slightly let him down, I think, was that yellow card in the last match up against New Zealand, but he was a bit of a quiet workhorse in that Australian loose forward trio, definitely in the absence when they didn't have Rob Valentini and also Pablo Matera. I do think that as the competition wore on, Matera slightly fizzled out a little bit, but still did have some great moments throughout the competition as a whole. So I thought an honourable mention was justified. In his case, number 7. This one's once again a little bit controversial depending on which player you feel did better out of the 3, but I have gone with Ardie Savea as the number 7. He showed some great skills as captain when he did get that opportunity. There are still many people who want to see him as the full-time AB skipper too, but he had 58 carries throughout this Rugby Championship, 16 defenders beaten, and can get those crucial turnovers. We did see it a lot throughout the earlier stages of the Rugby Championship for Savea, and he's had consistent minutes the whole way through. He's one of the first names that they put on the team sheet, and he'll always be one of those players who are still going at the end of a game. So for Ardie Savea, giving him their number 7. Now, honourable mentions in this department. I don't think there was a bad number 7 across the whole competition. Marcos Crema, he made 97 tackles, the most out of any player throughout this Rugby Championship competition. I didn't feel like he had as much of an impact on attack as Ardie Savea, but more than likely there would be quite a few people who select Marcos Crema in their sides, and I don't think it can be argued too much, as he did have a very strong competition as a whole. Also, Fraser McWright for the Australians. He got himself a couple crucial turnovers. He made 86 tackles, so actually second in the competition in that department. He had some great moments up against the Argentines in particular. So again, if people want to select him, I think it's completely justified in that department as well. Moving on to the number 8 position. This is where I've actually selected an Argentinian. Now, you could argue that it was a bit harsh not selecting Crema, so I feel like having a Puma in that number 8 jersey makes up for it a little bit, but I've gone with Joaquin Oviedo. I thought that he was one of the standout players across this whole Pumas side for the Rugby Championship. He had 55 carries. He beat 17 defenders. So I mentioned Ardie Savea maybe being at the top, but Oviedo actually having the one extra. He had 6 offloads, and the impact that he had off the bench up against South Africa in the final game of the competition at Twickenham, I feel fully booked his spot in my team of the tournament. He was strong in the starting lineup, and you know he's a good player when he leaves either Pablo Matera or Juan Matan Gonzalez out of a starting side. He just knows what is expected of him as that number 8, and I just thought he was phenomenal throughout the whole competition. But moving on to the backs now, number 9 and 10, they both play for the same side, Cobus Reinach and also Sasha Feinberg Mngumezulu. Now, Reinach got himself 2 tries in that last game up against the Argentinians. I think had he not done that, it could have been a lot closer, because he has also had his fair share of handling errors throughout this Rugby Championship competition. There were multiple times where South Africa would have scored. The referee would draw that TV and then they would rule it as a knock-on against Cobus Reinach. But he had 3 clean breaks, and also at the moment, had Grant Williams had a few more minutes, perhaps he could have taken that as the best number 9 for the South Africans. But a lot of people with the amount of experience that Cobus Reinach have are pretty happy with that 9 at the moment for the South Africans. So he gets the 9 for the team of the tournament. Honourable mention, Gonzalo Garcia, I actually thought did extremely well for the Argentines throughout the earlier stages of the competition. He hasn't got a huge amount of experience compared to some of those Argentine halfbacks of the past, but does look like he's got a bright future for Argentina. As the number 9 in the 10 jersey, this is where I did select Sasha Feinberg Mngumezulu. Now, you could argue that outside of that really strong game up against the Argentinians, Sasha early on in the competition was actually pretty quiet. Now, the last game up against the Pumas as well, he did show off his class. He's beaten 20 defenders throughout this Rugby Championship, also having 279 metres carried alongside scoring 50 points, 37 of which came from one game. And I feel like if you do break a record in a game, you deserve to be in the team of the tournament, no matter how you played in the other matches. So for me, Sasha and Cobus, pretty decent options for that 9 and 10 combination. Also, I should mention in the 9 department, had Roygar played a little bit more of the Rugby Championship, he definitely would have been up there as an option there too, having a big impact in his first match back up against the Australians. Moving into the centre pairing, number 12, Once again, a little bit similar to the number 7s. I don't think any side in this competition had a bad number 12, but in the end, I have selected Jordie Barrett in the team of the tournament. He goes ahead of someone like a Choco Barres, who I thought was extremely solid for the Pumas. Len Ikatel was one of the standouts for the Wallabies, and then for the South Africans, you've got that combination of either Damian Dialendi, and then also what I feel was the best performance at 12 throughout the Rugby Championship, that being Damian Valimza, although he just didn't play there enough to get that jersey. For this team, number 13, this is where I have selected Joseph Suali'i. Now, he had a couple really strong games for the Wallabies, couple slightly quieter ones too, but he still got himself the 4 tries, making him tied for the leading try scorer of the competition. He had 209 metres carried and also was just extremely dangerous on the counter-attack for the Australians. He's got a ton of pace, even though at times he looks like he's jogging. He is still able to outrun most of the opposition. He's got that power game, and him and Len Ikatel in the midfield, I think they've found something good there for the Wallabies, so hopefully we see a lot more of it. And at the near future for Jordie Barrett, he had 13 defenders beaten. He had 54 carries. He was the one consistent part of this All Blacks backline the whole way through the Rugby Championship, played every single game, found a good combination with Quintupaia right at the end of the competition, and perhaps that is what we're going to see for the All Blacks too, heading into the November internationals. But it moves us on to the back 3. Number 11, the thing is, I wanted to keep people pretty much in the positions that they were playing in the Rugby Championship. So in this case, I think the best left winger that we have seen consistently throughout the competition, and who we saw there pretty much for the most time, is Mateo Carreras of Argentina. He had 17 defenders beaten throughout this Rugby Championship competition, 253 metres carried, and I still feel like that try that they were able to score down his wing up against the Australians was the best of the whole Rugby Championship. It was such a thing of beauty to watch, and Mateo Carreras, anytime he gets his hands on the ball, you know something is about to happen. Ethan Hooker, I think, deserves a lot of credit for what he was able to do in the last 2 games for the South Africans. He really came into his own as the competition wore on, and I do think had he played maybe 2 or 3 more games, could have easily got that spot. As the left wing, number 14, this is actually, I believe, the hardest position outside of number 7. This one for me is going to split opinions, and I am 100% okay with that. But number 14 here for the Rugby Championship team of the tournament, I've gone with Max Jorgensen. Now, straight away, there is an obvious man that has not been picked there, and that is Cheslin Kolbe. If you're basing it statistically, normally Cheslin Kolbe wins that every day of the week. But interestingly enough, when looking through at those stats and diving in a little bit deeper, Max Jorgensen had a brilliant Rugby Championship. So straight away for Cheslin Kolbe, he was able to score himself the 3 tries. He was extremely effective up against the All Blacks. He was safe under the high ball. But the thing that really, I believe, has hurt him are those last 2 matches. The little mistakes from Kolbe, so uncharacteristic of a veteran like him. And I was jockeying up whether or not people would be more angry if I had put him in the team because of those mistakes, or whether if I left him out and people be annoyed at him not being involved. But when looking through at Max Jorgensen, he had 6 clean breaks throughout this Rugby Championship. He had 17 defenders beaten, so 6 more than Cheslin Kolbe. He had 267 metres carried, so an extra 42 ahead of Cheslin Kolbe. Although the interesting stat I have to say is Cheslin had less minutes than Max Jorgensen. Cheslin Kolbe having 343 minutes, so you could argue had he played the same amount of time, he could have added a lot more statistically for the South Africans. But Max Jorgensen, the thing that really impressed me about the youngster is he had 468 minutes throughout this Rugby Championship. He started the competition on the right wing. We then saw the injury at fullback, and out of all of the players to step into that role, yes, he has played fullback before, but this is now international rugby for Jorgensen, and he looked like a veteran out there half the time for the Aussies. Yes, the results didn't quite go the way the Wallabies would have liked, but I did feel like Jorgensen, for what he was able to do, he had almost double the post-contact meters of Cheslin Kolbe, bit of a different frame, and I've picked Cheslin Kolbe so many times for teams of the tournaments in the past, as well as actually picking him as one of the key players for the South Africans that I thought maybe this would be the perfect time to just mix it up a little bit, give Jorgensen some credit for what was a very strong competition. Also, someone else on that wing, in fact, there's two more players that I think deserve a bit of credit for what they were able to do. Leroy Carter, 3 matches played, 3 tries scored for the young All Black, and also Batista Delgui. When you talk about people being safe under a high ball, that man was phenomenal up against the All Blacks. He also had 6 clean breaks, so the same as Cheslin Colby and as Max Jorgensen, alongside 253 metres carried. So he is right up there as well. And in an ideal world, you could actually chuck one of those guys onto the left wing rather than Mateo Carreras. But once again, I wanted to keep players roughly where they were playing throughout the Rugby Championship. So in the end, after heavy debate, I went with Max Jorgensen on the right wing. Number 15, this is where I've gone with Juan Cruz Malia, and I do think that that one's slightly controversial, although it really shouldn't be with the way that that man played. He had the most carries out of any player in the Rugby Championship with 59. He had 5 clean breaks. He had the most metres carried out of any player with 337, and also was right up there for offloads, having a total of 11 throughout this Rugby Championship. He was able to slot on to the left wing for the last contest of the Rugby Championship up against the Boks. He was safe under the high ball and actually did win that aerial battle up against Cheslin Colby. And I know that that sounds weird to say because Colby, of course, gives up height to a lot of players, but he normally wins those aerial challenges 9 times out of 10. So for Juan Cruz Malia to be able to get it right and also just consistently perform throughout this Rugby Championship, I've given him that jersey as the number 15. Will Jordan, also extremely solid for the All Blacks. 6 clean breaks for him as well. 18 defenders beaten and the 264 metres carried. So you could have gone either way with those two, but I did just feel like Juan Cruz Malia, for where Argentina finished in the Rugby Championship as well, I feel like that makes his performances just that little bit more impressive. So that is why he gets the number 15. But I did mention earlier on that I do have a special award, one for the best forward off the bench in the competition and one for the best back. In my opinion, Arge Snyman was the best forward when it came to impact later on in the game for South Africa. You could also argue that Juan Matan Gonzalez was right up there for Argentina. But for me, Snyman, with the way that he's able to offload that ball, got very close to scoring multiple tries. I believe he had at least 1 disallowed throughout this Rugby Championship, but he set up quite a few tries too. And to give him that award ahead of Quagga Smith tells you exactly how well Snyman played throughout this competition. For the best back, this one was debatable because there were so many players in terms of those back replacement roles that had key moments throughout this competition. For me, though, I have gone with Damian McKenzie. He was able to get himself 33 points for the All Blacks. Now, some of those were from starting in the last game up against the Australians, but due to early injuries in a couple of the matches, we saw McKenzie put onto the field under pressure and still managed to perform to a relatively high standard. We saw it in the game when Amoni Narawa went down only a couple minutes into that Eden Park Test match. McKenzie came on and looked like he should have been starting from the get-go. He's got that composure, with the exception of his last game up against Australia, normally that kicking accuracy too. Now, I do have an honourable mention here, and that is Marnie Libok, for what he was able to do off the bench for the South Africans, although early on in the competition, he was getting some starting minutes, whereas McKenzie, he has had to really work hard to get any sort of start in this competition, but he's a guy that Scott Robertson goes to consistently, and you can understand why with some of those games that he had off of the bench. But nonetheless, that is my team of the tournament for this Rugby Championship. Of course, do let me know who you would select in the comments down below. Everyone's going to have a slightly different opinion. Everyone's going to be looking for something slightly different when it comes to what they want to select in their team. But overall, I think that pretty much everyone can agree this was one of the best Rugby Championships we have seen in quite some time. There has never been so many players that could be selected in a team of the tournament before. In terms of certain positions, you could pick a guy from every single side and there would be arguments as to why he was the best in certain positions. So it's been a pretty tough one to decide, definitely for an indecisive individual like myself. But I do thank you all very much for tuning in. If you did enjoy, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you all for the next one.